You started the live? Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to R&R episode 7. Today, me and Ricardo will start with a quote from the Zen Teachings of Bodhidharma. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Before we start, Ricardo, how is your Monday going? Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
It's going. It's fine. It's just it feels like a nice day. Been meditating, relaxing, having a good nice day off.
Exactly. Well, do you think we should wait a couple minutes for people to hop in before I read the quote?
Yeah, let's wait just probably a minute, and we can just get started from there.
All right. Sounds good. And Nick has just tuned in to the Instagram Live. Nick, thank you for watching.
Read the quote. He's very direct. Just read the quote. That's all I'm here for.
All right. He just wants to hear the quote and he wants to go. That's what Nick's going to do. Okay. All right. So this is Zen Teachings of Bodhidharma, Red Pine. He's done some great translations of Bodhidharma, the Diamond Sutra, and the Platform Sutra by the sixth patriarch, Huineng. So those are all great books. I highly recommend them for people that are interested in Chan, Zen, or non-duality. So the quote goes, everyone: someone who understands the teachings of sages is a sage. Someone who understands the teaching of mortals is a mortal. A mortal who can give up the teachings of mortals and follow the teachings of sages becomes a sage. But the fools of this world prefer to look for sages far away. They don't believe that the wisdom of their own mind is the sage. The sutras say, among men of no understanding, don't preach this sutra. And the sutras say, mind is the teaching. But people of no understanding don't believe in their own mind, or that by understanding this teaching they can become a sage. They prefer to look for distant knowledge and long for things in space, Buddha images, light, incense, and colors. They fall prey to falsehood and lose their minds to insanity. The sutras say, when you see that all appearances are not appearances, you see the Tathagata. The myriad doors to the truth all come from the mind. When appearances of the mind are as transparent as space, they're gone. Our endless suffering are the roots of illness. When mortals are alive, they worry about death. When they're full, they worry about hunger. This is the great uncertainty. But sages don't consider the past and they don't worry about the future, nor do they cling to the present. And from moment to moment, they follow the way. If you haven't awakened to this great truth, you'd better look for a teacher on earth or in the heavens. Don't compound your own deficiency.
Such a great quote. Oh.
Incredible. This is one of the best books on Buddha nature, non-duality meditation that I've ever come across. It's very straightforward. It's very simple. It's a bit difficult to grasp if there hasn't been a realization of nature of mind, Rigpa, Buddha nature, whatever we want to call it. But there's something about this book. When we read books like this, the reason that people read the Diamond Sutra, the reason that Huineng recommended his students, told his students to study the Diamond Sutra, was that the reading of that sutra and these teachings does something to a person on a karmic level, and it does something to a person on the level of spiritual wisdom as well. These books are the materialization of a specific consciousness, of a specific lineage that is awakened. And when you read the books, you connect with that lineage. Why is this whole importance in Dzogchen, the Mahamudra tradition, and Chan, of this whole talk of transmission and lineages? Is this very thing. When the Dharma is transmitted, or when someone's given a transmission or given a specific teaching, that teaching is a materialization of this unseen essence. Call it prajna, Buddha nature. And by receiving the teachings, by reading the sutta and considering what it's saying and meditating on it, we're able to come to our own awakened nature. That's the purpose of reading the sutras. It's not to actually create a new edifice of ideas. It's to get to the root of the mind, which is the root of ideas.
And it's interesting because when you read it, like when I first read these books about non-duality or just spiritual books in general, we read them and there's only moments that we get where there's a light bulb effect. It's like, oh, that perfectly makes sense. But different scriptures and sutras, the Buddhist sutras, there's moments where you read it and it's like, I don't understand any of this at all, because it could be contradictory. It could be just something so far off. And it's not until you start to meditate or have a sort of understanding about life where you come back and reread it and it makes sense. And this is one of those books. So when we get into Zen or the topic of non-duality, he says it right there. Non-duality, what is that? Non-duality is literally the teaching of the conceptual mind. The conceptual mind is the teacher. And so when you go deeper into the mind, you start to understand insight. Because it's not external. We seek and we seek and we seek, trying to find answers outside of ourselves, but really it's right here. It's when you sit down and meditate.
Yeah, I'd say the conceptual mind is what we actually mistake for the teacher. It's the non-conceptual mind. I think that's what you meant. The non-conceptual mind is the teacher.
Well, I find that there's no difference. There's really no difference, because the more you go into the conceptual mind, there's moments where that non-conceptual or that the conceptual mind, the dualistic vision of things vanishes. And once non-duality is present, once objectivity is present, it's not like, I feel a non-separateness behind those two. That's the only way I can describe it in my experience. There's really no difference.
Yeah, I think in, for example, in Tibetan Buddhism or in the Dzogchen tradition, they have this teaching of differentiating conceptual mind from Rigpa, right? So it's like what's happening with conceptual mind is that there's content. So there's ideas or things arising in the mind or within this container, so-called container of awareness. So ultimately, those two things are not different. Like emptiness is form itself is emptiness, right?
Right, on a specific level.
Yeah, exactly. On an absolute level, of course, there's no difference between the two. But from the relative level,
there is a big difference.
There's a difference, yeah, because the issue is that we're investing in the concepts and we're missing the actual Buddha nature in which those concepts are arising in. But you're right. You're talking at like the level of non-duality where it's like there's no difference between conceptual or non-conceptual.
Right. And it's good to understand. I find that for me, once I understood there's no difference logically, I found that it was helpful, but I can also understand where people can create a goal into having non-duality. It's like, so this is what logically non-duality feels like and what it seems like, so I'm going to chase that. But for me, it was different, because once I understood that, I wasn't trying to chase it. I was like, oh, that just makes sense. And I allowed the experience to happen so naturally. So naturally.
Yeah, I mean, Namkhai Norbu, all those years ago that we met him, I asked him, how do you discover Buddha nature? How do you realize nature of mind? And his answer was extremely simple. It was just, how do you feel? And I said, I feel present. But it wasn't really presence in the way that, we know it now, but it was like just a little bit of cognizance, a little bit of being really being with him in that moment. Then he said, and then I said, I feel present. And then he said, now relax. And then I totally went over my head. I was like, that's it? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, I didn't get it. Did not get it at all. Totally agree with me.
You make a good point, because I think conceptually we can say there is a difference between mindfulness and presence.
Yes, absolutely. This is a great point that we can get into. There's a difference between awareness, presence, and mindfulness. So from my experience with this, I would say that awareness is the consciousness itself, is actual consciousness faculty of the mind. So the mind has the capacity to be aware. It has the capacity to be conscious, to recognize things. That's a natural, inherent aspect of consciousness. So like thoughts don't perceive emotions. You know what I mean? Like there's an awareness that experiences, quote unquote, perceives thoughts and emotions.
Right.
That awareness, that we call that awareness. When we're directing awareness at something, we call that mindfulness. So like when we're directing when we're using that observation at an object, or directing our attention at something, that's mindfulness. So
right.
And remembering, the word mindfulness comes, the Pali word for it is sati. So there's this remembering aspect to it. And the third term we used was presence. And presence is like, if I see you out of the corner of my eye, I sense that you're there. I actually sense the presence of Ricardo as a person. It has to do with essentially an embodiment of awareness. It's like the presence of, it's more like an actual, I wouldn't call it a feeling, but it's like an embodiment of awareness. That's how I would describe presence. The same way that you feel the presence of a thing or the presence of a person. Presence is always used in relation to either awareness or the presence of something, like God, presence of Buddha nature, presence of this person, presence of that person. It's like the actual experiential quality of the very thing.
And so, kind of from your definitions, which one do you think is the most objective and non-dual?
Awareness. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say because it's really all essentially the same.
Right.
Same mind, same awareness in its various modes.
Right.
Like water, right? Water can crystallize, water can harden to become ice, and it can evaporate to become steam, and it can rain down to become water. It's all just the different forms of water.
Right.
I would say the gate for that, though, the gate for this specific subject is really awareness itself. Because presence is still dealing with the feeling, the quality, the experience of something, and then mindfulness is still directing attention. But awareness is the thing itself. It's the consciousness element itself.
Right. So I guess my understanding of first mindfulness is we hear all the time, be mindful. So observe what's coming up and try to redirect it in some sort of capacity. If I feel this way, I'm aware, this feeling's coming up. I'll try to. It is a form of reaction almost. It's so reactionary when it's not. It's more of a. For me, what I've learned is it's not supposed to be a reaction. It's just a very smooth sailing awareness to it. Being aware of even how your mind is reacting and the bodily functions of what's going on entirely. Now, when we go into presence and awareness, when I think about presence, I think of the first level of awareness. You as a person are aware of what's going on, the thoughts, the feelings, what's external, what's internal, right? But you're still an individual observing things. You're still that person identifying as the observer.
Yeah, you're still in the sense of me doing the watching.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for the viewers, when we talk about awareness, I think it needs to be understood that and we talked about this previous episodes, there's no you. Really, awareness is, if we can kind of describe it, it's being the observer of the observer. You're being aware now of you're no longer in the state of you, of me, of I. That completely vanishes. And that's what Ryan described as awareness.
Yeah, the initially when we do this kind of self-inquiry practice, whether it's in Vedanta, Chan, whatever tradition it's in, when we ask the question, who am I? Or when we look internally, there's still this feeling that you're you, right? There's still this feeling of being your name or being who you're from or being your body. It's almost like a structure, basically, that is there. And as a person becomes more familiar with awareness, as they become more familiar with mind, with Buddha nature, it's like the solidity and the realness of that you structure. We call that ego or reactive mind. That solidity becomes very fickle and thin. Because previously you're identifying completely with this sense of self, the person you are in time and space, stories, your past, the things you want. That's like the totality of your life and reality. That's it. Nothing else exists outside of that. But as you begin to relax and open up and be present and even investigate what mind is, turning awareness in on itself, you discover that awareness presence is empty.
Right.
And that all those things that we say we are, that essentially we know we are. People, we identify with the body, we identify with whatever had happened in the past, we identify with the things that we want in the future.
A group.
A group, exactly. When we ask ourselves, who am I? It's like we actually have to go and grab out for those things and be like, yeah, this is who I am. But anything that is being grabbed at, or anything that's really being identified with, is just another thought. It's just another thought, feeling, or memory.
Exactly. And
yeah, and those thoughts, feelings, and memories are impermanent by their very nature. This is essentially why a teacher or the teachings say, they talk about anatta, no self. There's no self in the five aggregates. There's no self in there's no, like, if you cut this body apart, you wouldn't find Orion inside it. You just put all of these composite parts, my face, my memories, the consciousness faculty, the body, you put that together and you label it Ryan, you label it self. But if we actually dissected it, you would get particles. Rupa kalapas is the word for it in Pali.
Well, I always find it that the ego structure has to have everything in control. The mind itself is trying to solidify control, whether it's identification, whether it's grouping, compartmentalization, all these things it's meant to control. But when we get down to real awareness, everything's so chaotic and everywhere, and it's very fluid. Until the fluidity disappears, it's no longer fluid or control. And essentially, that's where I find people want to be. Yes, you want to be flexible, but at a certain point, there's no longer here.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. If someone asks you as a teacher of this sort of stuff, how do you get out of duality? How do you get out of separation? And the answer to that is that it was actually never any separation to begin with. That's the realization that unfolds. So it's not the reason. Why is it called non-duality as opposed to oneness? Has anyone ever wondered that? It's called non-duality because it's a negation of the existence of dualism. So what is dualism? Subject and object. The whole idea is that in absoluteness, outside of our limited sense of self, there is no separation. It's like when we look at a cell, we see all the composite parts of the cell, but that's the same cell, right? It's the same. It's one cell, even though there's chromosomes and mitochondria and lysosomes and all that stuff. It's the same cell. Just these various composite compartments have their own labels and functions, but it's the same cell. It's the same with our reality. The reality is the reality, and all the composite parts in it are just labeled. We label those things and we say this is that and this is this, but those are actually just concepts and labels that we've created for the objects themselves. The idea is that at the most fundamental level and in actuality, there's no separation between any of the objects. There's no separation between what seems, it's like, actually Tina, I interviewed her very well. I interviewed her and she gave a great description for it. Non-duality is like, imagine the fingers on a hand. So when we start the spiritual journey, we're very convinced that we're this individual seeker. All these seekers, all these individual people. And as the meditation progresses and as awakening ensues, we go deeper and deeper. More of our true nature unfolds and we realize that this is all the same hand. So these fingers appear separate, but they're all actually the same hand. That's a way to explain non-duality. There's this appearance of separateness. There's this appearance of form, but those are all appearances. So path is directed at that which is not appearance. That which is, Theravadins call it Nibbana.
So
Dzogchen calls it this, or the different traditions have different names for it, and there's degrees of non-duality.
So I find it that I think certain individuals call non-duality emptiness, and then you have some individuals calling it oneness. And I find it that they're both right. I feel I think they're totally right on their part. There is a oneness and there's a non-oneness, and then, but that's the best way to describe it from their experience and from whatever their level of understanding is. For example, you have the Christian Bible, more of being one with God, union with God, yoga. But then you have the Theravadins that believe in non-self, anatta. So it's almost empty. It's complete. And so but see, that's the way to for me, it makes sense on both sides. But then if you want to go deeper in terms of the esoteric side to it, is empty. It's still like emptiness is still a form. Form is emptiness.
Yeah, it gets into the debate of which goal of the path is the highest goal. You know, even within Buddhism, it seems you have different versions, different definitions of enlightenment, especially when you compare it to Vedanta and Hinduism. So, you know, in Buddhism, as far as I've looked into it, seems there's 3 possibilities as the end goal. So nirvana is the end goal in Buddhism. It is either described as a dimension where the Buddhists still exist in after they passed away. There's a lot of Mahayanists that believe that. That's kind of related to Pure Land Buddhism. The other end goal is Nibbana, Nirvana, ultimate enlightenment as cessation. So enlightenment as a vacuum of nothingness. You literally you cease to exist, like a flame blowing out. That is the goal of many Buddhists. And another definition of Nibbana is as an element, like a deathless, all-pervading, unknowable, unmanifest thing, but it's still a thing. You just call it the unborn. So it's Nibbana Dhatu, so it's referred to as the deathless element. It's an actual element.
Right.
So there's a lot of debate in the Theravadan world over which one is the actual and highest end goal. Because in Mahayana, they actually see Nibbana as cessation as a lower attainment. They consider it the ninth like the ninth formless attainment or the ninth absorption.
So what's interesting to me is when we get into the different sides of Buddhism, it, in general, on the basis of it is obviously you have meditation, but it's putting in the work to get toward these states. One side is emptiness, the other side is oneness. Emptiness and oneness. And what needs to be applied to get to these states? Effort. I'm hesitant to say this, but
it's an oxymoron, like, because we say effort, and of course, right effort is one of the aspects of the Eightfold Path. Yes, for sure. If a person wants to enter samadhi and enter the attainments that the Buddha talked about and spoke about, yes, it is going to require some commitment, because the purification of mind for these states is very refined. But when it comes to actual, like when we look at the Mahayana teachings, for example, we read Zen Teachings of Bodhidharma, the Buddha nature, essential nature of mind is there effortlessly. It's just the natural awareness. So in Dzogchen and Mahamudra, a lot of the path is resting in that natural awareness, continuing in it, so as to continue in the unfoldment of realization. So that's actual, it's like in Dzogchen, you get the pointing out instructions when after you've done the preliminary practices, the teacher points out the nature of mind, and you take the nature of mind, your Buddha nature, or not your, but just Buddha nature, that becomes the path all the way until full enlightenment. So it's like when we say effort, there's this sense of doing, but what might be more accurate is actually a non-doing and an undoing.
But see, now I think advising beginners should be addressed in this way, where there is an effort to it. There is a doing in the beginning, because if you listen to a lot of non-dual teachers, again, it's non-dual. It's they'll describe it as you're
not doing anything.
Yeah, you're not doing anything. It's like how does that make sense? Like Wu Wei, a Taoist term, action with an inaction. How can there be action when there's no action? So it's meant to be more of a flow of nature. That's the only way I describe it. It's a very natural thing. Do we look at a tree and we say the tree recognizes itself to be doing something, or is it's just there naturally growing? The river just continues flowing without. It is what it is, and that's the essence to it. So when we get into meditation, as a beginner, we find that we're doing something. I need to sit down. It's very mechanical. I need to sit down. I need to do my practice, get up, do the same thing over and over. And that really exhausts a practitioner, because it becomes a mechanical process, just like normal life, right? And so to get into a deeper state, you can say, is trying to not trying to figure out, just continue being present with the entirety of everything, the thoughts and the emotions that you're feeling, without losing sight of, without trying to make it mechanical. Recognize that you're making things in a mechanical process. Meditation isn't like that. There's, at a certain point, you as an individual as your ego vanishes, but that's later down the line. Maybe some people are having experience of that. But as beginners, a lot of beginners will have this problem where they'll make it into a mechanical process. And I don't know about you, Ryan, like obviously in the beginning, you felt the same way. There was a doing. And then a certain time, it's like, oh, I'm being aware of me doing this process, right? And then comes a later state of, but the very doing was distracting me.
Yeah, there comes a point where you realize that doing is just another aggregate. The sense of doing, and volition is considered an aggregate. This is an actual function of consciousness that moves in a certain direction. It has a like will, right? The will to do something, volition. That's just another thing that comes and goes. So initially, a lot of our identity is tied up in volition and effort. So when we're doing the whole meditation thing and we're starting the spiritual journey, of course there's effort. You have to, you can't even like sit on the ground for 15 minutes without moving. Hell yeah, it's going to take effort to be able to sit still. So yes, it's going to require effort. But here's a good point too. You can't get to effortlessness. You can't really get to effortlessness through effort. How do you, from a contortion of the mind, of forcing through effort, get to effortlessness? It doesn't work like that. You have to let go. That's how effortlessness comes up. So what can happen is that if I tell a beginner to sit down and just not do anything and let go, their mind's going to go all over the place.
Right.
So of course we teach a technique and we bring someone to the center of the body, and eventually there's enough stabilization, there's enough clearing in the mind stream that they can fully let go, and the mind will stay exactly where it is. The presence will continue. But oftentimes you just tell someone to do that from the start, it doesn't click. Their mind it's just the same patterns that their mind has always been in. There has to be a kind of clearing, at least initially, and then that can actually progress. It's like if you tell someone to just observe the breath at the abdomen, and if they don't actually apply themselves initially, their attention will just totally be in thought. But the sooner you can let go, and the sooner you can allow an effortless awareness to arise and become manifest, the easier and the better meditation actually is. Because the whole point is you want to get out of the way so that consciousness can unfold. But sometimes we need to keep applying ourselves until the mind is ripe and that is allowed to happen. Because if I just tell you from the start, don't do anything, you read that as, oh, I'm just going to keep doing the normal stuff that I do and not meditate. That's exactly not what we're saying. That's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is, in meditation, don't leap. There's this sense of having to do something. There's a sense of having to consider something. There's a sense of, you're trying to remember this, or you're trying to remember that, or you're trying to figure something out. Don't do anything. That's what we're saying. Don't do.
But see,
yeah.
How do you not do anything? How does that make sense? It's because usually when you try to understand these things, if you try to understand yourself using your logic and conceptual mind, what tends to happen is you're using the mind to understand the mind. So you're coming in circles all the time. You may logically understand something. You may make a story out of a situation. Like, oh yeah, I have this anxiety. Where did it come from? I came from here when I was younger. It was this, this is what happened. Yeah, okay. So you have that in your mind. You figured it out. Now what? Does it disappear? Does it go away? Do you feel better? No, it doesn't. It doesn't ever go away like that. How do you work with it really in a natural way is what Ryan just described. You start to have observation, and through observation that sort of effortless effort comes into play. How? Because you're no longer identifying with the mind. And that's the point of meditation. You're trying to observe the mind. You're not trying to be the mind as you were in the beginning, identifying with this feeling, with that trauma, with this pain, with this story, all of it. And again, it comes back into individuals use the mind to understand the mind. Individuals use the mind to justify their actions.
Yeah, there's even effortless effort is just another way of saying effort. Really, it's just an effortless version of it. So even effortless effort is when I say that, you might still have an idea of doing something. And if we're using a meditation object like a breath, like the breath or whatever, for sure, there's going to be a sense of having to direct consciousness at it. But if we're doing a Dzogchen practice or a Shikantaza for Zen, we're just staring at a wall, eyes open, not doing anything. What does that actually mean? It means to stare at the wall and actually not engage in any mental activity. So
yeah. Yep.
yeah, it just means to refrain from action or movement on any level whatsoever, and even the refraining is an action. There's a sense that you need to restrain anything. There's no restraining. The idea is that you relax enough, and you're relaxed in presence, and you're not engaging anything. That's non-doing.
And to go further with it, when again, it's not refraining from anything. You're not trying to meditate and refrain from feeling an emotion or an idea or a thought.
Refraining from engaging.
Exactly. So you're not again, it's going back to what I said. You're not trying to use the mind to figure things out. You're just simply observing whatever comes up naturally, emotionally, logically, whatever. You're just simply watching, and that's what the reframing means. You're not doing anything from that. You're just watching, and that's all it is. And that's what it sort of is interpreted when we say not doing anything. It's because you're not using the mind. You're just simply watching. So you get to that point where awareness solidifies. So yeah, I think when I see these conversations, Ryan, what tends to happen is people may get confused about non-duality because we're explaining it in this sort of context of, oh yeah, effortless effort, this and that. I think once we talk about how to reach those points and how to investigate it, they can really start to understand these things. Because again, in the very beginning of my point, I didn't understand any of this effortless effort. I didn't. I knew some parts of it. I knew, oh yeah, being natural, be with nature, be still. Those things make sense, right?
It's just like this, as we talk about non-duality, and I say these words and I say these phrases, when I'm saying them, you may be creating images in your head. You may be getting ideas about certain things. What is this guy trying to say? What does he mean? I don't understand. Where is the question coming from? So if you were to look at your own mind and see where the question is coming from, who's asking it, where is it coming from, you'd be able to begin to awaken to and understand what it is that we're referring to. When I say presence is empty, what does that even mean? It means that if you were to turn awareness in on itself, you wouldn't find anything tangible. That's all that I'm saying. So these terms are, when we talk about non-duality, it's difficult because we're talking about an intangible, even more intangible than thought. So people can just miss it altogether. But if you're able to look at where the concepts are coming from, if you actually took time to clear the mind, to stabilize it, and to investigate it and see, you'd find that there's this awareness. And the more familiar you become with that awareness in meditation, outside of meditation, the more basically spiritually unfolded you are.
I always describe it in this way, where you were born and you were given a name, and growing up you had these influences, your mother, siblings, father, and so you start to identify with these things. Then you go further and society starts to influence you, whether you're in school, whether you're with your friends. Then you start to grow up more, and then you start to solidify certain habits. You start to think, oh, I really am these things, or new ideas come to play, and you continue to layer on in this structure of who you are. When we go into meditation, it's such a natural pace to peel the layers until you get to who that individual was without the name, without the identity. Who is that
That's
person?
a great point.
Who is that person?
Yeah, it's like a koan. If you didn't have a body, what would you look like? Right? If you didn't have a body, what would you look like? You don't know. It's an intangible, and that's the point. The more you're able to rest in that knowledge, and in that presence, it can be a quantum leap for people's meditation practice. Because up until that point, even in meditation, the mind is being directed at the object as opposed to itself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's good. You absolutely, to develop samadhi and to develop these deeper states of meditation, and by deeper we mean like very refined. Don't feel anything from the five senses. You can sit there for 4 hours without moving, without a thought, without anything. Yes, it takes training for that to arise. But when we're just referring to awareness itself as the base of practice, as it is in Dzogchen, Mahamudra, Vedanta, it just takes a recognition. It takes more of an investigation than it is more of a looking inward than it is of a pointing outwards with a meditation object.
Right. And once you refine your awareness, you no longer see things as what you thought they were. You really experience who you are, or this person, or this thing for what it is, not the label, not the concept. Those things are fully gone now. You're living in the present moment. And I'm laughing because it's such a wonderful thing. It's you get to experience things for what they are. That's stillness.
Yeah, what keeps us out of the present moment is the fixation with time, and what keeps us out of awareness and Buddha nature is the fixation with form. So the more attached we are to objects, the further we drift from ourselves, essentially. And our obsession really with the past and the future is exactly what keeps us out of right now, when right now is all that there actually is. I mean, even if you were able to time travel, when you got back there, you'd be in the now, just over there. So
right,
the present reality is all that there is.
And you make a good point, because it is a place of time. So I'll describe it like this. Say you're in a relationship and it's so beautiful in the beginning. It's going well, beautiful moments. A year passes and things start to change, which they usually do. And there's a moment that comes up in your mind. Why is this person not the same as they were before? I don't understand. Then there's tension in the relationship. Then you start to want that person from the past. So now you're wanting a person that's not even there. That's no longer there. You're wanting a person and now recognizing that things change, things flow. So you're no longer experiencing that person for who they are. You're putting a label on them and saying this is who they are. They are no longer that person. But were they in the beginning? Or did you now recognize that things change? That things are more, they're much more deeper than that. The person that you were dating weren't the things you labeled them or conceptualized?
Yeah, it reminds me of the NLP phrase, the map. The map is not the territory. Your projection and conclusions about a person are not the actual person.
Exactly.
They're literally happening in your mind. Whatever it is that you think about anything is happening in your mind. So science is the closest that we could get to objectivity, but even a lot of science changes with time. So, or changes as there's technological advancements and improvements in the field. But the projections that we have about a person, or the thoughts that we have of a person, are just that. They are literally just the thoughts that we're having about that person. Whereas we can make conclusions and we can make observations, but that's not the actual thing. In the same way that the map is not the territory.
Yeah, and that's a sort of example of what Ryan you said about people living in time and space, because again, it's you're expecting the person to change, or you're not expecting this person to change. You're focusing on something that was from the past, which is most things in our minds is something from the past. So
yeah, there's this, it's like a natural inclination to not want things to change. You know, we as animals, we thrive on things being as comfortable as they can be for our survival. So I think change at any level, in any way, is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And when something is very stable, it's understandable. It's something that we can relate to. It's something we're familiar with. But as soon as it starts changing, especially in ways that are unfamiliar to us or in ways that we don't like, there's resistance, and there can even be animosity. But my question is, why is there an insistence that we need people to be how we want them to be? Why do we need anyone? Why do we need anyone to have to be a certain way? You know, I don't have a kid, I don't have a child, but you know, as parents, we always want our kids to, or oftentimes many parents want their kids to just, you know, go into a similar life path that they went into, because that's just what makes sense. You know, that's just a functional way of being. But I feel that when we condition people, we rob them essentially from making their own discoveries. And this is one of the things that I've always tell people about spiritual teachers and gurus. Everyone's thinking like that their life is a movie because we've watched movies our whole lives. So we're all waiting for this teacher to show up and just tell us the answers to our lives. Like, who am I? What is my purpose? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to handle this? How do I get over this obstacle? Like, we're expecting someone to literally, you know, we're waiting for the master to appear, because in freaking Karate Kid, it says when the student is ready, the master appears. You better hope that that's the case, but it's a freaking movie. So it's true in some cases.
It is true in some cases, but
it is, of course. But the point is, like, we're still looking for external answers, and this is why I really am against this specific thing. Even if a teacher, a master, or a guru tells you who you are, what you're supposed to do, and what your purpose is, it's his answer. It's his answer. It's not your answer. You didn't discover it. You heard it from him. It's another concept. It's another idea. How do you know if it's true or not? You don't know anything. So you have to come to your own, we have to come to our own conclusions. Least someone gives you the wrong information. What if someone gives you the wrong information? You accept it. Wasted years.
Now, if he's a good master, from my experience with teachers, let's say you're like, oh, I need some advice about this job, and
great master doesn't even answer that question. Like,
so what I've seen happen is, let's say you're trying to, I don't know, you're going down a music career, right? Well, yeah, I really want to be a part of this music career, and I think it's going to be good. Most of the time, well, I don't want to say most, but depending on the situation, the master would be like, yeah, go for it. Why? It's up for you to discover that it wasn't for yourself.
I love that story.
It's going literally. It's what if the master did say no? what's going to happen? Do you not trust the master anymore? Are you going to go against him? You know, it's really what you want and desire so much, and that's what you want to hear from him. So why not go for it? You'll learn the lesson that needs to be there. But there are times like what Ryan said, where you're going to find a teacher and you ask the right question. They'll be like, yeah, they'll tell you. But
yeah, my experience with teachers is that they usually, at least mine, have always turned the question back on me and asked me what it is that I wanted to do, or what it is that I was looking for, or what do I think about it. I think a lot of the role of a teacher and a guide is to introduce you to yourself, the same way that a therapist introduces you to yourself, but instead it's introducing you to like your total self or your non-self, your true self, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, but the reason that I specifically go hard on that specific topic is that so many of us are just looking for people to tell us what to do. We're just looking for people to just say, this is it. Like, just do this and, everything will be okay. And it's possible that it'll work, right? If the master's legitimate and a real master, the advice could be very solid. But it's also the case that you're getting some wrong information. And
right.
If you make some major decisions based on wrong information, the consequences are dire. So,
right.
especially when it comes to spirituality and when we get into like esotericism and empowerments and initiations and all this stuff, like a lot of us just have no idea what we're signing up for.
Well, see, now I think that would be another good episode just to come back to it about masters and how there's probably more. I feel that the path, there's much more wrong turns on the path than there is right turns. So
I completely agree with you on that.
And so I
completely agree on that.
So I think that should be the topic for next week or another time.
Yeah, there's so many different paths, but they are paths, and there are certain characteristics of those paths. And if we're on a specific path and the characteristics are not matching up, then we can get a sense that, oh, this is actually not what I'm heading towards. If your goal or your aim is to discover your true nature or to realize enlightenment, that may not come through worshiping cows. It's just probably not going to happen. So these are things to consider. Certain things match up and certain things line up, and those are indicators that we're on the right track. And when there's a discord and a disharmony and certain flags that come up, we could definitely see, oh, okay, it makes sense. I made the right choice.
Oh God, I'm a cult.
I've been indoctrinated. I'm being brainwashed. It's happening. Yeah, absolutely. But this was a great talk. Thank you everyone who listened and who tuned in on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and the Daily Pause page. We appreciate you watching, and if you have any questions about meditation or anything, or you want us to further clarify on anything we touched on here, just message us and we'll be more than happy to reach back out to it next week. And do you have any final thoughts, Ricardo?
Final thoughts. Yeah. When you meditate, be loving to all your thoughts, even if they're looking bad, even if you understand it as bad. Those areas need as much love as they can get as your positive side.
So, Ricardo, you're going to come back over here so we can finish Attack on Titan?
Anyways, guys, you can find Ryan. I think Ryan has his Instagram.
Yeah, you can find me at ryan.jburton on Instagram, and Ricardo and I are going to start doing stuff on Clubhouse, so we'll make announcements on that too. And that's a super fun app, and we meet lots of cool people on there. So we'll love to have you guys chime in on a call. So.
And again, you guys can find me at the Millennial Monk on Instagram. So.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you next week.